Enugu was a city of contrasts. At first glance, it seemed an ordinary place, filled with hum of daily life, people rushing to and fro, buildings soaring into the sky, the air thick with the promise of prosperity. But for Caleb Madu, this city represented something far greater. It was a chance for a new beginning, a new life, one that he would build carefully, step by step, without raising suspicion. Caleb arrived at dusk, just as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, a sign, he thought, of his fate aligning with the universe. He was well dressed in a dark suit, his tie a perfect shade of deep crimson. His shoes gleamed in dim light as he stepped out of the taxi and looked around. He took a deep breath. Enugu was bustling with energy, but Caleb felt something more, an ancient quietude, as if the city itself held secrets waiting to be uncovered. He quickly secured a modest apartment near the heart of the city. The address was nothing special, yet it was positioned perfectly for his purpose, far enough from the crowded areas to keep a low profile, but close enough to the business district to be part of the action. Inside the apartment was neat and bare, as Caleb liked it. His personal space was minimalist, cold, clean, and efficient, just like his mind. Caleb had been alive for much longer than his appearance suggested. Decades perhaps. Centuries had passed since his death. He had once been a simple man in a distant village, living a life that should have ended long ago. But now, as he walked among the living, his face unmarked by time, no one suspected that he was not quite human. His only focus was survival, the delicate art of blending in. The first few months in Enugu was critical. Caleb had no real identity other than the one he carefully crafted. He chose to introduce himself as a business consultant, a role he could easily assume, having spent countless years amassing knowledge of various industries. Caleb was not only intelligent, he was incredibly perceptive, able to read people's thoughts and intentions with an ease that felt almost supernatural. As he began to build his new life, Caleb avoided establishing lasting relationships. He needed to keep his distance, and any connection he made had to be temporary. But there was something different about Amara. She was a woman of remarkable beauty. Yes, but it was her intellect and warmth that drew Caleb in. She was sharp, but not suspicious, trusting, yet cautious. They met during one of his consulting sections, and within weeks, Caleb found himself drawn to her. Amara, for her part, was not easily impressed by men. Her intelligence and strong sense of independence kept her from being swept away by charm alone. But Caleb was persistent, and over time he began to see in him a deep vulnerability, a quiet sadness that intrigued her. Their romance moved quickly. Caleb's outward perfection, his impeccable manners, his business acumen, his understanding of the world won her over completely. They got married within the year, and Caleb moved into her spacious home, a place that became his sanctuary, one filled with warmth and life. Caleb had been dead for years, but he had never felt more alive. He had a beautiful wife, two healthy children, Obi, his eldest son, and Chiamaka, their young daughter. The family appeared to be perfect in every way. To the outside world, Caleb Madu was a successful businessman, a loving husband, and a devoted father. But the cracks in the facade began to appear slowly, almost imperceptibly. Caleb's unwillingness to discuss his past was the first sign. When Amara asked him about his family or his childhood, he would change the subject or offer vague, disconnected answers. His memories, it seemed, were blur, scattered like fragments of a broken mirror. His refusal to acknowledge his parents or any distant relative seemed odd, especially given the deep respect he had for family traditions. One evening after dinner, Amara asked Caleb, "Do you ever miss your home, where you grew up?" Caleb paused for a moment and then his eyes softened. "Home is a memory, Amara. The place where I grew up, it no longer exists. I carry the memory of it, but it has faded with time." Amara smiled, not fully understanding, but accepting his answers. She noticed that sometimes Caleb seemed distant, his eyes clouded, as if he were somewhere else entirely. It troubled her, but she tossed the thought aside. Perhaps it was the pressure of his business or the weight of the world he seemed to be carrying on his shoulder. Despite these moments of unease, life seemed to continue normally. Caleb's business grew exponentially and Amara's career flourished alongside his. They lived in a luxury, attended high profile events, and seemed to be the perfect couple in the public eye. But there was always the undercurrent of something more sinister lurking behind the surface. Amara's doubts began to grow when Caleb disappeared for 3 days without explanation. This was not the first time he had been away on business, but the suddenness of his departure, coupled with his refusal to explain the nature of the trip, unsettled her. When he returned, he was quieter than, than usual. His presence even more imposing. The house felt heavier, the air thick with tension that Amara couldn't shake. It was on the third day of his absence that Amara stumbled upon something that would change everything. While Caleb was in the office, Amara decided to sort through their personal files, papers, letters, old documents that had accumulated over the years. She found a folder tucked away in the back of a drawer, one she hadn't seen before. It was labeled simply "Obituary of Caleb Madu." Her heart stopped when she opened it. The obituary was dated several years ago in a distant village. Caleb's name was unmistakably, but the date of death was 10 years prior. The shock hit her like a blow. Caleb Madu, the man she had married, was supposed to be dead. How could that be? Amara's hands trembled as she sat down trying to make sense of what she had discovered. She knew she needed answers, but she feared that the answer would shatter everything she thought she knew. Lola, Caleb's trusted assistant, had also begun to notice strange things. There were moments when Caleb's behavior seemed out of character. His eyes glazed, his voice cold and detached, as though he were slipping in and out of some trance. She had grown increasingly concerned, and when she overheard a conversation between Caleb and another man, a mysterious figure she had never seen before, she knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. Lola, like Amara, began to dig deeper. She tracked down record of Caleb's early life, but there were no answers. His name didn't appear in official documents, and no one seemed to know where he came from. As she dug further, she began to see the horrifying truth. Caleb Madu had been dead for longer than she had ever let on. The man who walked among them, who built a life, a family, and a business, was a corpse. She confronted him one evening, cornering him in his office. Caleb didn't flinch when she showed him the evidence, the obituary, the records. He merely looked at her, his eyes darkening with an emotion that was almost regret. "You figured it out," Caleb said, his voice cold. "I am not the man you think I am. But this life, this charade, is the only thing that keeps me from being lost in the past. I am more than a man, I am something cursed." Lola recoiled, fear creeping into her bones. "Cursed?" she whispered. "But you've lived among us, built a family, a business. How?" Caleb's face hardened. "I've done what was necessary to survive, Lola. But Now you've learned too much, and for what you must pay the price. Before Lola could respond, Caleb turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing from sight as if he had never been there. The next morning, Caleb Madu was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that anything was amiss. His house, once filled with the noise of children and the laughter of his wife, was empty. His business, it seemed to be in a perfect order. Caleb had vanished as if he had never existed. Amara, searching everywhere for him, his office, the streets, the markets, but Caleb was gone. No one had seen him leave. There was no sign, no clues to where he had gone. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. But the city and the world moved on. Caleb was forgotten. His family carried on without him. Though the hole left by his sudden disappearance was felt deeply by Amara, their children, and even his business associates. The once perfect family home stood in quiet stillness, a symbol of something lost, something that could never be replaced. Amara, however, was no fool. She knew something had happened, something beyond her understanding. As the weeks passed and she tried to piece together what little she had, there was always an unsettling feeling that lingered in the corners of her mind. Caleb's disappearance was too perfect, too calculated. It was almost as if he had planned it long before anyone could suspect. Lola, now a nervous wreck, couldn't forget what she had witnessed. The conversation with Caleb echoed in her mind. His words about being cursed, about being something other than human. Though she hadn't truly understood what Caleb had meant, she could not shake the chilling conviction that there was more to the man than met the eye. She decided to go back to the records to search for any clue she might have missed. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no sign of Caleb. Amara, though heartbroken, had no choice but to move forward. She buried herself in her work, tending to their children and trying to live a semblance of a normal life. But everything felt wrong. The house, once filled with laughter, was now eerily quiet. The children missed their father more than they could express, and Amara herself felt a growing emptiness as if she were losing a part of herself. One fateful afternoon, when Amara was walking through the market in the heart of Enugu, she felt a chill down her spine. She paused mid step, suddenly aware of a presence behind her. There, standing among the crowd, was Caleb. His tall figure was unmistakable, his well tailored suit perfectly in place. His face, though, was different. There was something hollow in his eyes, an unsettling emptiness. Amara's heart raced, and she quickly turned to approach him. But before she could reach him, he disappeared into the crowd, his figure swallowed up by the mass of people moving around her. She called out his name, but the sound was lost in the din of voice and clattering footsteps. Panic gripped her chest. Was it really him? Could he have returned? Or was it some cruel illusion? A trick her mind was playing on her. That night, Amara could not sleep. She lay in her bed, her thoughts swirling around Caleb and the eerie encounter in the market. Her pulse quickened as the memory of his cold eyes came rushing back, and the words he had spoken to Lola echoed in her mind. I am cursed. There was only one thing left for her to do. She had to find him, no matter what it took. Amara searched for Caleb. It took her to places she had never thought to look for. She revisited their long, old home, now abandoned and overtaken by weeds, and combed through every room for any sign of him. Her quest for answers brought her to old friends, business partners, and even to the last remaining relative of Caleb that she could find, a distant cousin living in a small village on the outskirts of the city. The cousin, a frail old man named Uche, had little to say at first, but after Amara pressed him for answers, he finally spoke. Caleb was not born like other men, Uche said, his voice shaky with fear. He was a cursed one. His father, my brother, found him abandoned on the banks of a river many years ago. The boy had no name, no family, but he was not ordinary. He was something else. My brother raised him, but the signs were there from the start. Caleb could not age. He never grew sick. He was always different. Amara listened in stunned silence as Uche continued. He spoke of strange occurrences that surrounded Caleb's childhood, of the rumors that had followed him throughout his life. It became clear to Amara that Caleb was no ordinary man, but she still could not understand the full extent of his curse. The river, Uche whispered, is where it all began. The place where he was found, it is said to be cursed by the spirits of the past. Those who are born there never truly die, but live in the shadows, always changing, never truly human. Amara's mind raced as the pieces slowly began to come together. Caleb had never been a normal man. He had been hiding his true nature all those years, walking amongst them like a ghost, living in a world of the living, while simultaneously being a part of the world of the dead. But what did that mean for the children? What kind of legacy was Caleb leaving behind? It wasn't long after her conversation with Uche that Amara finally confronted Caleb again. He appeared before her, not in the city, but in their old home, now abandoned and falling apart. The windows were shattered, the roof sagging, and the walls were covered with grime and decay. Yet, there in the middle of it all stood Caleb as if nothing had happened. I knew you would find me, Caleb said, his voice flat and emotionless. His once perfect suit was now worn out and torn. His face, though still handsome, had a hollow, a lifeless quality to it. His eyes, once warm with love and care, were now distant, as if he were looking through her rather than at her. Amara took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Why did you disappear, Caleb? Why did you leave us? Was everything a lie? Caleb's lip coiled into a faint smile, but he held no warmth. I had to leave, Amara. There was no other choice. You don't understand. I am a man trapped between worlds. I was never meant to live among you, but I had to, for your sake, for our family. The curse, the things I carry within me, they are not yours to bear. Then, why did you marry me? Amara asked, her voice breaking. Why did you let me love you? Caleb's expression softened for the briefest moments because I want to feel what it was like to be a human again, to be loved. But I knew this day would come. I knew that eventually the truth would catch up with me, and now it has. Amara's eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer to him. You could have stayed. You could have found a way to live together. But Caleb shook his head. No, Amara, I don't belong here. I never did. The world that you live in, it's not mine. I am not your Caleb. Before Amara could speak, he turned and began to walk away. Where are you going? She cried. But he didn't answer. He simply walked into the shadows, his figure disappearing into the dark of the ruined house. The next morning, Caleb Madu was gone once more. This time, there were no signs of him returning, no trace left behind. It was as if he had never existed at all. Amara searched everywhere, but there was nothing. His disappearance was as inexplicable as it had been the first time. And just as quickly as he had entered her life, Caleb was gone, leaving behind only the haunting memory of what he had once been. The city moved on. Life returned to its usual rhythm, and Caleb's name faded from the minds of those who had known him. His business dissolved, his family scattered, and his story became little more than a whispered rumor. An airy tale that would be told for years to come. But Amara knew the truth. Caleb had not just disappeared. He had been something else, something beyond the reach of ordinary men. and in the depth of her heart, Amara understood that she would never see him again. As for Caleb, he was a mystery, a ghost who had walked amongst the living, never to be seen again. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening to our wonderful story. Until we come your way again, kindly like, subscribe, and share this channel, Tales Before Dark. We'll bring you nothing but suspense filled stories, intriguing, and very, very catchy stories. Until we come your way again, like, subscribe, share. Thank you.